So, design for recycling. Why this talk? We heard a lot of recycling right now. So, the question that returns all the time is, what does this mean? So, how do we implement the idea? How can this be a vehicle for sustainability? This is where the challenge truly lies. Ultimately, we do not have a reference point. We have product design, everything's ready, but design for recycling, how do we start? What do I have to take into account? And this was a question that we were faced with as an industry as well. And the initiative came from the Circular Plastic Alliance. In the alliance, we have the 5 industry segments: automotive, construction products, just to name 2 of them, and they're the topics. So there are 5 topic segments, if you will, that horizontally stretch across those industry sectors. And one of those is design for recycling. And it's a relevant topic, if not the most relevant topic. And what we heard today is this will also be reflected in the new standard. So, put simply, in more than the 90 standards that are currently being reworked or newly written, there will be a number of recycling for recycling requirements, not only for construction products, but other products as well. Now, let me briefly explain how we approach this work in terms of methodology. So we talk to the product developers that are organized within the Quality Assurance Association. We formed task forces. So we have to make one thing clear. What are the connections? Where are the interfaces? Design for recycling, of course, is part of the circular economy. Circular economy can be achieved by 2 dynamics, either looking at the offer side and you're flooding the market with a huge amount of recycled material, recyclates that need to be then used for production, but this is currently not the case. Or you approach it from the other side, namely the product side, and say, okay, I'm developing products in such a way that there is a demand in recyclates on the market, and thereby I generate my circular economy. There's another perspective. Products, not only construction products, need to be able to take on recyclates in larger quantities than before, depending on the respective product, but must also be recyclable themselves once they reach their end of life. And the third fundamental characteristic is that by the use of recyclate, the quality must not be reduced. So those are the 3 key preconditions that were the leading principles and parameters for the discussion when it comes to draft the fundamental principles and describe the fundamental principles of design for recycling. So looking at the guideline, in the drafting of the guideline, we assumed from the get-go that this guideline can also turn into a standard without knowing that there would be a standardization request. This was just our intuitive approach. Whatever we do today should be able or enabled to become a standard tomorrow. So we chose the structure of a European standard. So we start with the scope of application or the scope, then we have the normative references, then we have the terms and definitions, and then the focus in the middle part, this is where it gets interesting. We have the chapters 4 and 5. So chapter 4, general principles and guidelines. So specification of the raw material, functional aspects, quality assurance, and reusability of the completed or finished product. And chapter 5, product specific design for recycling guidelines. So those are groups, categorizations, a clustering of product groups as such, then where you can use recyclates, where, yeah, in the conceptualization process, and then, of course, the allocation and the share of recycled materials used. So the share of recycled materials needs to be measured very precisely. So mass balance approach is what we use today. So how much recyclate and fresh material or primary material is used in the entirety of the process, and from that we calculate the share of recyclate. So this is quite difficult. And if you don't have proper processes in place, it's not particularly easy to calculate this share of recyclates in the process. And then, of course, traceability. So, how across the entire value chain can I determine or precisely specify the source of the recyclate, can trace it over a process and determine the quality according to the input and output principle? So, these were the questions that the task force used and had to answer. So let me talk about the first principle when it comes to a design decision. What is this supposed to mean? So the product developer has their own approach of how they develop a product. And here on the right-hand side, you can find a flowchart of the rather generic path or a generic flowchart. So you start with an idea, and then you turn it into a product. You have suggestions. Where do we want to go? What is this new product supposed to be able to do? Exactly at this point already, the first question is asked: is the product that is to be developed in its conceptualization be recyclable or not? Question number one. And question number two, is this product able to assume or take on recyclate? So this is a decision that the product designer takes exactly at this point and can then answer this question in the negative or in the affirmative. If the answer is no, then the product is out of scope. So it is not subjected to those guidelines for design for recycling. Of course, the product can be further developed. That's not the question. But the first requirement has not been met. So recyclability at the end of life and the taking in of recycled material are the two main or essential preconditions that have to be checked by the product developer. If the person has answered this question, these questions in the affirmative, they can continue with the product development all the way through the flow chart and then conclude it with a feasibility study, which usually marks the end of the design process. So then you have a prototype and then you prepare it for the implementation phase. So you can see here the product developer has to have a paradigm shift in terms of their mindset. So they are not only developing in a customer oriented way, but they're integrating a different concept in the very early development phase where there is a decisive decision that they have to make. Second criterion, we talked about it already, is the recyclability. And here, once again, the question was, right, how can we evaluate that? What kind of reference points do we have? Is there anything that can help me to actually map to what extent and how this product is recyclable, and if it is so at all? So we took quite a young standard, if you will, so the DIN EN 45555, which is a standard that was developed for electronic articles. And it was a standard that was quite helpful because it can be applied to various or all product groups. And the only thing that you have to change, you can see on the left and right hand side, are the criteria. So the criteria are ultimately product group specific. However, the path of decision making is applicable to other product groups. So once again, a clear benefit of standardization, right? So you can use what's already there, so you don't have to invent the wheel every time. So you just have to adjust the catalogs of criteria. So when it comes to the window, it is relatively easy because think about the end of life step. So the end of life of a window, then the first requirement is, okay, the window needs to be disassemblable in its own individual parts so that the individual components can then be fed into the corresponding recycling loop. So the frame, the glass, the fittings, so sealing material, everything has to be separated. And it is true in particular for downstream electrification. So if you have a window profile that will be later on electrified, equipped with an electrical element or equipped with a cable, then the product turns into something different. it is not a construction product anymore, but it is now subject to the rules and regulations of electronic articles. This is very important. You need to know this. So there is a different product development in this sense. So the ex post equipment of a certain product, which then changes the rules and guidelines this project is subject to. And then also you have to trace the use path and the end of life. And at the end, you need to be able to guarantee the recyclability. So in the scope, then, we not only focused on priority products, but we said, okay, those design guidelines need to be available or applicable to all product versions that are produced today for system houses. We mainly, of course, focused on PVC windows and doors, but also relatable products such as shading and other products that emerge from building profiles, construction profiles, and that do fit the portfolio. You can see that here on the left-hand side in the schematic drawing, so that you can easily see what kind of products are or were included in this type of design. For all, applicable is a definition. So what kind of raw material is used? What about functionality and quality aspects? Longevity, the surface design, coating, adhesives, energy efficiency, joint density, then environmental tolerability, if you will, because of course you need to guarantee that the products in their design are compatible with environmental protection, and you need to document that. So looking at the quality seal, we are of course always confronted with interior climate. So a building product needs to be compatible with the external environment, but also must not exert any negative influence on the interior climate. All those things need to be reflected and taken into account in the design process. And then last but not least, we have the identification. So you have to think towards BIM. So identification here is a very important element that will be particularly relevant in 20, 30, 40 years' time, so that you can identify what is part of the construction product. So this is also a design element that is relevant, and that was also included into the guideline. So looking at the share of recycled material, so we thought, okay, we will cluster the products in different product groups, so that we can identify where recycled material is used, so that we can achieve a clustering and categorization, because with regard to end of life, it needs to be entirely clear what has been built into the product, so that the product can be separated into its individual components, so that we can guarantee recyclability, so that we have certain elements that we can identify and then separate, as well as construction characteristics. So this is how you can identify or define the nominal share of recycled material. You can define where recycled material has been used, and this is particularly relevant uh, for the funding that you can ask for. And you can once again look at the specification um, and how it is impacted by different end of life scenarios. So you have a different ways of scenarios that can be used by the developer and to reflect that in their design process. Maybe the most important process is that pillar, sorry, is that of quality assurance and product quality. What kind of quality expectations has in the market? We will not be well received, and this is not only about construction products, but product in general, especially when it comes to packaging. We will not be accepted with our products if we have a reduction in quality. So that is why we also looked at the design guideline and checked the overall standards for quality assurance, in particular DIN standards, of course. But we also, and this is a huge asset of the PVC windows, We already have various national certification systems that span across all of Europe that have been well established. For example, ATG, Como, in France, QB34, and in Germany, RALGZ. There is a number of other certification labels that I cannot mention all of them here, so this is not an exhaustive list. But it's always important that we are aware that what is available as as quality labels is something that is used. I think this is decisive. It is not decisive, or what is key is not to differentiate, but to make use of all the quality certifications that are available on the market. So outlook. So this guideline was drafted quite quickly, thanks to the great commitment of all those experts working on it. We were able to decide it very democratically within the industry that this guideline will be acknowledged by all system houses and is now entering the implementation phase. We scheduled 1 year for doing so. We conducted the corresponding trainings, and this implementation phase is actually at the moment ongoing. And by the end of the year, it will be completed with the goal to collect experiences and then to use those experiences so that they can be factored into the final version. One little success for our industry, I believe, is that this guideline, which basically is a voluntary guideline that you can subscribe to, it is an industry guideline, was also used as a source for a European standard, which is to end in a overall standard for the use of PVC products in construction. We have the Task Force 21C249. They have been working on PVC window profiles as standards, and now they were asked to further extend the norm and the standard for PVC products in the construction area. And so once again, we are spearheading in the industry, and I'm just mentioning this right now. And the thing that is really good and that we always have to address is what we're doing right now must not only be limited to one industry, but we need to keep in mind the idea of standardization also for other industries and products.
We just heard what is ahead for us. We have more than 95 norms that actually either have to be rewritten or written from scratch. So if that leads to every norm being an individual norm and they are not compatible anymore, then it's not going to be something that we can implement in the market. Because with the circular economy and using more recyclates, we're only going to be able to do that if we have the right conditions, if all of that is compatible as well. Meaning, if recyclates from packaging are being used in the building sector, and I mean, it's more difficult the other way around, but specifically when it comes to packaging to building materials, it can be used like that, or agriculture and automotive. So these thresholds have to be managed so that we can actually have a lively market in the end, where recyclates can then be made available and be used for new products. So that is a very important goal for the circular economy, and that is something that norms can support. And design for recycling is a small part of that, but maybe a very important part for these big norming efforts that are ahead of us. And with that, I would like to say thank you